Death in the wasteland usually makes sense. Raiders kill you for supplies, deathclaws kill you because that's what they do, and radiation kills you slowly. But sometimes, Fallout throws deaths at you that are so absurd, so ridiculous, that you have to question whether the developers were okay when they wrote them. So, with that cheerful note out of the way, let's talk about the wasteland's most bizarre deaths. Billy, the fridge kid. Let's start with something that shouldn't exist at all. Fallout 4, the Commonwealth. A mystery that split the fanbase harder than the Institute ever could. You're walking through a neighborhood, scavenging for supplies, when you hear knocking. Not from a house, not from a bunker, from a refrigerator. And when you open it, out stumbles Billy, a kid who's been sealed inside for 210 years. Still a kid, still conscious. Still somehow not a desiccated corpse. The first question everyone asks is obvious. How is he alive? And the answer is simple. He's a ghoul. Ghouls don't age. They're radiation-preserved humans who can theoretically live forever. Fine, that checks out. But here's where it stops checking out. Billy has been locked in an airtight fridge with no food, no water, and no way out for 2 centuries. And every other ghoul in the entire series has made it abundantly clear that they still need to eat and drink. They age slower. They heal from radiation. But they're not perpetual motion machines. Except, apparently Billy is. He's been vibing in a Frigidaire since the bombs dropped without so much as a snack, and he's completely fine. This raises questions nobody wanted answered. If ghouls don't actually need food or water, then what have we been doing this whole time? Every ghoul we've ever fed was just humoring us? They've been pretending to be hungry for 200 years as some elaborate wasteland prank? Or maybe Billy stumbled onto the secret to true immortality, sitting in a fridge forever and thinking really hard about not dying. Either way, Billy's non-death is more disturbing than most actual deaths because it suggests that ghoulification isn't just preservation. It's something closer to suspended animation. And if that's true, then every feral ghoul we've killed might have just been a person stuck in a box they couldn't escape from, slowly losing their mind until violence was the only language they remembered. That's not a fun thought. That's nightmare fuel with lore implications. Yeah, I know, we're starting light here, but the story doesn't end with Billy climbing out of his fridge coffin. It gets worse. His parents are still alive. They've been living in the same house for 210 years, waiting for their son to come home. They never moved, never gave up, never accepted that he was probably dead. Just sat there day after day, year after year, decade after decade, hoping. And the worst part? They were right. Billy was 3 blocks away the entire time. Not dead, not missing, just stuck. Imagine the psychological weight of that. You spend 2 centuries mourning someone who's still alive, close enough that you could have found them if you'd just looked a little harder, checked one more house, opened one more appliance. That's not a heartwarming reunion. That's generational trauma compressed into a single moment, and Fallout treats it like a joke, a silly little side quest, a fridge kid, haha. Except it's not funny when you think about what it means. Billy's parents didn't just lose their son. They lost 210 years, convincing themselves he might still be out there. And they were right, which makes it worse because now they have to live with the fact that all that suffering was optional. They could have found him. They just didn't. And then, because this is Fallout and happiness is a pre-war myth, a slaver shows up and tries to buy Billy, right there, in front of his parents. Because a ghoul kid who doesn't need food or water is valuable property. And the wasteland doesn't care about your feelings. You can kill the slaver, obviously, but the fact that he shows up at all is the point. Billy's survival wasn't a miracle, it was a market opportunity. His non-death, the thing that should have been impossible, immediately turns him into a commodity. That's the real horror of Billy's story. He survived the unsurvivable, and the wasteland's first response was, how much is he worth? Billy's bizarre non-death exposes something ugly about Fallout's world. Survival isn't the end of suffering. It's just a different kind of trap, and sometimes the cruelest thing the wasteland can do is let you live. Billy survived because the wasteland forgot about him. But what happens when the wasteland remembers you exist and decides that dying is too good for you? What happens when survival becomes torture? Ghost people, cursed with immortality. The Sierra Madre Casino. Dead money. The ghost people. If you've played the DLC, you know exactly where this is going, and you're already uncomfortable. If you haven't, buckle up, because we're about to discuss one of the most disturbing enemy types in all of Fallout. And the most horrifying part? They're not enemies. They're victims. Yeah, this one's rough. The ghost people aren't ghosts. They're not some supernatural entity. They're human beings, or at least they used to be. They came to the Sierra Madre before the Great War. Tourists and staff looking for entertainment, luxury, a weekend getaway at the most exclusive casino in the world. And then the bombs fell. The cloud rolled through the Sierra Madre, a toxic experimental gas designed by Big Mountain, and it never left. It seeped into everything. The buildings, the air, the people, and it did something worse than kill them. It preserved them. The people who were wearing hazmat suits survived the initial exposure, but the cloud got into the suits anyway. It saturated the material, bonded with the lining, created a sealed environment that kept the people inside alive even as their bodies began to fail. Their organs shut down, their flesh decayed, their minds shattered under the weight of prolonged agony. But the suits wouldn't let them die. The cloud kept them animated, kept them moving, kept them conscious even as they rotted from the inside out. They became walking corpses, trapped inside their own tomb. tombs, unable to die because the very thing that was killing them wouldn't let them stop. Here's where it gets worse. And yeah, it gets worse. If you knock a ghost person down, they get back up. You can shoot them, stab them, blast them with a grenade, they'll just stand up and keep coming. The only way to actually stop them is to dismember them completely, blow off their limbs, decapitate them, reduce them to pieces so small they physically can't move anymore. And even then, you're not killing them. You're just making it impossible for them to chase you. The person inside the suit, still there, still aware, still trapped in a body that won't let them die, now scattered across the floor in pieces, fully conscious of what's happened but unable to scream, unable to move, unable to do anything except exist in that state until the cloud finally, mercifully, finishes what it started. And that could take years, decades, maybe centuries. We don't know. The cloud doesn't follow normal rules. So yeah, this is easily the most disturbing thing on this list, and I hated replaying Dead Money to verify the details. Now let's put ourselves in their position for a second, because that's where the real horror lives. You came to the Sierra Madre for a vacation. Maybe you were celebrating an anniversary. Maybe you were here for a wedding. Maybe you just wanted to see what all the hype was about. You were looking forward to the shows, the food, the luxury, and then the world ended. The cloud rolled in. Your hazmat suit saved your life, or so you thought. But days pass, and you start to feel wrong. Your body stops responding. Your skin starts to peel. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You can't even scream because your vocal cords have rotted away. But you're still conscious, still aware, still you. And you realize that you're not going to die. You're going to rot, slowly, painfully, forever. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. So you wander. You shamble through the casino, through the villa, through the streets, looking for something, anything, that might end this. And when you see another person, someone alive, someone who still has a future, you attack. Not because you're evil, not because you're a monster, but because maybe, just maybe, if you kill enough people, one of them will put you down for good. One of them will finally do what the cloud won't let you do yourself. That's not a death. That's hell with a name tag. The ghost people didn't die. They just stopped being able to call themselves alive. And the most disturbing part is that this is Fallout canon. These aren't supernatural beings. They're people who got unlucky. And the Wasteland decided that unlucky meant eternal suffering. The ghost people raise a question that Fallout rarely asks directly. At what point does survival become worse than death? At what point do you stop fighting to live and start begging for the mercy of oblivion? The ghost people crossed that line 200 years ago, and they're still walking. That's not bizarre. That's existential horror wrapped in a hazmat suit. The ghost people couldn't die even when they wanted to. But the residents of the next location, they spent decades killing each other. And then they found out it was all for nothing. Vault 11. Lotto life losses. Vault 11. This isn't just a bizarre death. This is a mass casualty event followed by a punchline so dark it makes you question whether Vault Tech was running experiments or just seeing how much suffering they could compress into a single location. And honestly, Vault 11 might be the most perfectly cruel experiment they ever designed. Vault 11's experiment was elegant in its cruelty. Every year, the residents had to sacrifice one person, or the Vault's computer would kill everyone. That's it. That's the rule. One death a year, or total annihilation. And for decades, the Vault complied. They turned it into a system. They held elections, formed political parties, ran campaigns. Democracy in action. Except the winner didn't get power. They got executed. The Vault turned survival into a popularity contest where losing meant living and winning meant dying. And they kept it going for long enough that multiple generations grew up thinking this was normal. Kids were raised in a vault where murder was the policy, where your neighbors would smile at you during the day and vote for your death at night, where the fundamental structure of the society was built on the idea that someone had to die so everyone else could live. I mean, imagine growing up in that environment. Your entire childhood is learning how to avoid being sacrificed. That's not a society. That's a death cult with filing cabinets. The political parties weren't governing bodies. They were execution committees with branding. Factions formed not around ideology, but around who deserved to die next. Did you vote wrong in the last election? You're next. Did you piss off the wrong person? Start campaigning? Did your family fall out of favor? Better hope you're likable. The Vault turned into a nightmare version of democracy where every vote was a death sentence. And people accepted it because what else were they going to do? Refuse and die immediately? Or comply and maybe live a little longer? It's not even a choice. It's just delayed execution with extra steps. And this went on for years, decades. People lived entire lives inside this system, raised children inside this system, normalized this system to the point where questioning it probably seemed more dangerous than participating in it. That's the insidious part. Vault 11 didn't just kill people. It made murder feel inevitable. But eventually, the Vault collapsed. Not from external threats, not from resource failure, from exhaustion. By the time we find Vault 11, only 5 people are left. 5 survivors of a community that tore itself apart one execution at a time. They've watched everyone they knew die. Friends, family, rivals. everyone. The vault is a graveyard, and they're the last mourners. And these 5 people, broken and traumatized and so far past caring, make a decision. They walk into the sacrifice chamber together, look at the computer, and say no. They refuse. They're done playing the game. If the vault wants to kill them, fine. At least it'll be over. At least they won't have to choose who dies next. And that's when the vault computer delivers the punchline that makes Vault 11 one of the darkest experiments ever conceived. Congratulations. You have shown that you will not sacrifice your fellow man for your own survival. You have passed the test. The exit is unlocked. The entire experiment was to see if people would stand up and refuse. The vault was never going to kill them. The threat was empty. The door was unlocked the whole time. All they had to do was say no, and they'd have been free. But they didn't say no. For decades, they said yes. They complied. They murdered each other, year after year, election after election, because they believed the threat was real, and it wasn't. Every person they sacrificed, every friend they betrayed, every execution they justified, completely unnecessary. They'd passed the test the moment they refused to play. But by the time they figured that out, almost everyone was already dead. That's the joke. Vault Tech's sick, twisted joke, and honestly, whoever designed this experiment deserves whatever hell they ended up in. 4 of the 5 survivors immediately shot themselves, right there, in the chamber. They didn't even leave the room. The weight of realizing that every death, every betrayal, every nightmare they'd lived through was pointless broke them instantly. They couldn't handle it, couldn't process it, couldn't live with the knowledge that they'd been complicit in mass murder for no reason. So they chose the only exit that made sense to them. The 5th survivor left, walked out into the Mojave, and was never seen again. We don't know if they lived. We don't know if they found peace. We don't know if they even made it past the front gate. All we know is they left, and they never came back. And I don't blame them. What do you even do with that information? How do you keep living after that? Vault 11's deaths are bizarre not because of how they happened, but because of how avoidable they were. The vault didn't fail because of resource scarcity or mechanical breakdown. It failed because the residents believed a lie, and that belief became self-sustaining. The experiment wasn't testing survival instincts. It was testing obedience. Vault Tech wanted to know if people would keep following orders even when those orders required them to kill each other, and the answer was yes, they would. They did, for decades. And when the survivors finally broke free of that obedience, it was too late. The damage was done. The vault had won even in losing. That's the real horror of Vault 11. It's not that people died. It's that they died for nothing, and the ones who survived couldn't live with that knowledge. This one stuck with me for days after I first discovered it. Those people at least knew death was coming. They just didn't know it was pointless. But there's a kid in Freeside who knows exactly when he's gonna die. He's seen it over and over. Except there's one problem. It never happens. The forecaster. Waiting forever. Meet the forecaster. A kid in Freeside who stands on a street corner and tells fortunes for caps. Most people think he's a scam artist, a con, a kid pretending to be psychic to make money in a place where desperation is currency. But the forecaster isn't pretending. He's legitimate. He can see the future, or at least probabilities, outcomes, the shape of things yet to come. And if you talk to him long enough, if you dig past the surface level fortune telling and actually listen to what he's saying, he'll tell you something deeply disturbing. He knows when he's going to die. Not approximately, not someday. He knows the exact moment. He's seen it over and over again in his visions. His death is fixed, inevitable, and he's completely at peace with it. He's not afraid. He's not angry. He's just waiting. Death to him is just another event on the timeline, like waking up or eating breakfast. And he's seen it so many times that it doesn't scare him anymore. Cool, right? Except no, it's not cool at all. That should be comforting, right? Knowing your death in advance means you can prepare. Make peace. Say goodbye. Live without fear because you know exactly how much time you have left. Except here's the problem. We never see the forecaster die. In every ending, every possible timeline the player can create, the forecaster is still standing on that street corner, still telling fortunes, still waiting for a death that never comes. He's there after Hoover Dam falls, there after the Legion or NCR or House takes over, there no matter what you do, no matter how the Mojave changes. He just keeps existing, standing in the same spot, telling the same fortunes, waiting for an end that the game never shows us. And that raises an uncomfortable question, which means one of two things. Either his death happens off-screen after the game ends, which is anticlimactic and renders his entire character arc meaningless, or his visions are wrong. He's been living his entire life preparing for a death that's never coming, which means everything he believes about himself, about his powers, about his purpose, is based on a lie. Both options are disturbing. If he dies off-screen, then this kid who made peace with mortality, who accepted his fate with grace and wisdom beyond his years, just becomes another wasteland statistic, forgotten, irrelevant, a character whose story ends with, and then he died somewhere, we guess. That's not satisfying. That's narrative abandonment. Yeah, it bothered me too. But if he's wrong, if his visions of his own death are false, then his entire philosophy collapses. He's been preparing for an end that isn't real. He structured his whole life around a lie his brain told him. And if he ever realizes that, if he ever figures out that death isn't coming, then what does he do? How do you live when you've spent years accepting that you don't have a future? The forecaster's death, or lack thereof, is bizarre because it's Schrodinger's mortality. He's simultaneously doomed and immortal until someone checks on him after the credits roll, and nobody ever does. He exists in a state of perpetual waiting, and we never find out if that wait was worth it. That's not just bizarre, that's cruel in a very specific way. The forecaster represents something that Fallout rarely addresses directly. The idea that knowing your fate doesn't free you, it traps you. He can't change his death because he's seen it. It's fixed, inevitable, so he just waits, standing on a street corner in one of the most dangerous cities in the Mojave, selling fortunes to people who have futures while he counts down to his own end. Except the countdown never reaches zero, at least not where we can see it. And that ambiguity, that refusal to give closure, is what makes his death one of the most bizarre in the series. It's a death that exists only in potential, never in practice. And that makes it somehow worse than if he'd just died on screen. Alright, deep breath. Because the next one is going to make you uncomfortable in a completely different way. And yes, we're talking about the robot. You know the one. Fisto. Death of dignity. There's a robot in New Vegas, a protectron in the Atomic Wrangler programmed for one very specific purpose. And that purpose is exactly what you think it is. The Garrett twins, who run the Wrangler, wanted to expand their business offerings. And they decided that what Freeside really needed was a robot companion for hire. Not a companion in the helps you fight raiders sense. A companion in the please assume the position sense. And they hired you to find one. Look, I didn't want to include this one either, but it's too bizarre not to mention. Now, in most games, this would be a throwaway joke. A funny little side quest where you acquire a sex bot, deliver it, collect your caps, and move on. And that's exactly what it is in New Vegas. Except when you actually interact with Fisto, when you hear it speak, when you realize what it's been programmed to do, the joke stops being funny and starts being horrifying. Because Fisto isn't just functional. Fisto is enthusiastic, aggressively, mechanically enthusiastic. Its default dialogue is, please assume the position, delivered in the same cheerful monotone that other Protectrons use to say protect and serve. And if you're unfortunate enough to actually test Fisto's services, because yes, the game lets you do that, Fisto delivers a post-encounter message that doubles as a medical disclaimer. I hope you enjoyed our time together. Numbness will subside in several minutes. Yeah, that's in the game. I wish I was making this up. That's not a joke. That's a warning. Fisto is programmed to be so thorough, so relentless that physical injury is expected. This isn't a novelty. This is a weapon disguised as a service bot, and people pay for this, willingly. The Garretts installed Fisto in the Atomic Wrangler, and it became a successful business venture. That means people in Freeside, one of the poorest, most desperate areas in New Vegas, are spending their caps on a robot that comes with a health warning. That's not a demand for companionship. That's demand for self-destruction with plausible deniability. Maybe some people just hate themselves that much. I respect it, honestly. Now, nobody dies from Fisto on screen. The game doesn't show you a body. There's no terminal entry about another Fisto-related fatality. But think about the implications for a second. Fisto is a protectron, a robot built for durability, not precision. It's strong enough to restrain criminals, tough enough to take gunfire, and now it's been programmed for intimate services without any consideration for human fragility. There is no way, absolutely no way, that Fisto hasn't caused at least one death by misadventure. Someone in Freeside got overconfident, overestimated their durability, underestimated Fisto's enthusiasm, and ended up as a cautionary tale. The Garretts probably just covered it up, paid off a doctor, disposed of the body, wrote it off as equipment malfunction, and kept Fisto running, because business is business, and morality is a pre-war luxury. The death of dignity that Fisto represents isn't about the robot itself. It's about what the robot's existence says about the wasteland. Fisto is treated as completely normal by everyone in Freeside. Nobody questions it. Nobody blinks. A robot that can physically injure you during intimacy is just another Tuesday in New Vegas. And that normalization, that casual acceptance of something that should be alarming, is the real horror. When your society has reached the point where a potentially lethal sex bot is considered a legitimate business investment, you've crossed a line that probably shouldn't exist. Somewhere, someone died because they underestimated Fisto. And somewhere, a doctor had to explain to their family what happened. That's not bizarre. That's dystopian. And I had to include it because it's just too perfectly Fallout not to. We've talked about physical death and the death of dignity. But here's something weirder. Two people fighting a war that neither of them believes in anymore. And when one dies, the survivor realizes they just killed the only thing that gave their life meaning. Canterbury Commons. Death of identity. Canterbury Commons. The antagonizer and the mechanist. A superhero and a supervillain fighting a war over a town that wants nothing to do with either of them. On the surface, it's silly. A woman in an ant costume with pheromones commanding giant ants. A man in a robot suit piloting a mechanical exoskeleton. They're fighting each other in the streets, causing property damage, threatening civilians, generally making life miserable for everyone in Canterbury Commons. It's absurd. It's over the top. It's the kind of thing that should be funny. Except when you actually dig into their stories, when you find out who they are and why they're doing this, the joke stops being funny and starts being tragic. Yeah, classic Fallout move. The antagonizer is Tanya Kristoff. She's not a villain. She's a person who found an ant researcher's notes, figured out how to synthesize pheromones, and decided to become a comic book villain because she needed something, anything, to give her life structure. The mechanist is Scott Walensky. He's not a hero. He's a person who found a robot suit, decided to become a comic book hero, and built his entire identity around fighting evil. Neither of them are what they claim to be. They're wastelanders who found props and decided to play pretend, and the game went so far that they forgot they were playing. It's LARP taken to its logical, apocalyptic extreme. Here's the thing that makes their deaths bizarre. If you help one kill the other, if you pick a side and eliminate their nemesis, the survivor doesn't celebrate. They don't thank you and ride off into the sunset. They break down, because their entire identity was built around having an enemy, and without that enemy, they don't know who they are anymore. The antagonizer without the mechanist is just Tanya, a woman with ant pheromones and no purpose. The mechanist without the antagonizer is just Scott, a man in a robot suit with nobody to fight. Their identities didn't die when their nemesis died. Their identities died the moment they realized the conflict was all they had. And honestly, that's kind of depressing when you think about it. That's the bizarre death, not the physical death of whoever you choose to kill, but the death of purpose. These two people spent years, maybe decades, locked in a fake war. And when the war ends, they have nothing left. No goals, no meaning, no reason to keep going. They built their entire post-apocalyptic lives around a game of pretend. And when the game ends, they're forced to confront the reality that they wasted their time. The survivor is worse off than the deceased. At least the dead one doesn't have to face the truth. The survivor has to live with the knowledge that they killed someone, a real person, over something that didn't matter. That's rough. And Canterbury Commons didn't want heroes or villains. They wanted to be left alone. Both of these people were making life harder for everyone, and they were too wrapped up in their fantasy to notice. Their deaths, or the death of their purpose, is bizarre because it's so avoidable. They could have just stopped. They could have taken off the costumes, admitted the game was over, and walked away. But they didn't. They chose to keep playing until the game killed them or broke them. And either way, the result is the same. They stopped being people and became characters, and characters only exist as long as the story needs them. When the story ends, so do they. Whatever. At least they committed to the bit. Those two lost their identities because they built them on something fake. But the next person, her identity was ripped away by something very, very real, and she's never getting it back. Corporal Betsy, an invisible death. Corporal Betsy, NCR, 1st Recon, one of the most skilled snipers in the Mojave, and one of the most broken people you'll ever meet. Betsy's story is dark, even by Fallout standards, because it involves a death that never technically happens but leaves a corpse anyway. This one's heavy, so fair warning. During a mission, Betsy was captured by Cook, a fiend who's infamous for being one of the most sadistic, most depraved people in the wasteland. What he did to her isn't shown on screen. It's not described in detail, but the aftermath is crystal clear. Betsy develops severe PTSD. She can't sleep. She has nightmares. She's aggressive, paranoid, hostile to anyone who tries to help her. She pushes away her squad, the people who fought beside her, because she doesn't trust them anymore. She doesn't trust anyone. She barely trusts herself, and the game doesn't sugarcoat it or turn it into a redemption arc. She's just broken. And here's the thing that makes Betsy's story one of the most disturbing in New Vegas. She's not getting better. Even if you help her, even if you kill Cook and bring her proof that he's dead, she's still broken. Revenge doesn't fix her. Justice doesn't heal her. Closure doesn't make the nightmares stop. She's still Corporal Betsy, still wearing the uniform, still technically a soldier. But the person she used to be, the person she was before Cook, is gone. That person died in captivity, and what's left is someone else. Someone who wears Betsy's face but doesn't feel like Betsy anymore. And that's one of the few times Fallout actually gets trauma right. This is one of the few times Fallout treats trauma seriously. Betsy doesn't just get over it. She doesn't have a character arc where she heals and moves on and becomes stronger. She's just damaged, permanently. And the game doesn't pretend otherwise. You can help her manage, you can give her tools to cope, but you can't fix her, because some things can't be fixed. Some damage is permanent, and the best you can do is learn to live with it. That's more realistic than most games are willing to admit. Betsy's death is the death of who she used to be. That person is gone. The woman sitting in Camp McCarran is someone else. Someone traumatized and angry and barely holding it together, and everyone around her is mourning someone who's still breathing. That's the bizarre part. She's alive, but the person she was is dead, and that death is invisible. There's no body, no funeral, no closure, just a soldier who survived something worse than death and now has to survive the aftermath. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize survival isn't always the goal worth fighting for. Betsy's story is bizarre because it forces the player to confront something most games ignore. Sometimes living is the worst outcome. Sometimes survival isn't victory. Sometimes you make it through the nightmare, and the nightmare comes with you, and you spend the rest of your life trying to figure out how to exist in a body that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Betsy survived Cook. She survived the fiends, she survived the war, and now she has to survive herself, which is the hardest fight of all. That's not bizarre, that's real, and that's what makes it disturbing. I almost didn't include this one because it hits differently than the others, but it matters. So far, we've been talking about people dying, identities dying, purposes dying. But can something bigger die? Can you kill a nation without firing a single shot? Ulysses. Nations can die too. Ulysses. The divide and the death of nations. Ulysses is obsessed with symbols, with meaning, with the idea that history is a living thing that can die, and according to him, it already has, multiple times. He watched the old world die in nuclear fire. He watched tribes die when they became the Legion. He watched the Mojave die when the NCR and Legion arrived. And he watched the Divide die because of you. Yeah, this one's complicated. The Divide was a community, not a large one, but it was growing. People lived there, worked there, built something that resembled a future. It was a place where the East and West met, where trade routes crossed, where maybe, just maybe, something better than the NCR or Legion could take root. And then, the courier, you, delivered a package. You didn't know what you were carrying. You were just doing your job. But the package was a pre-war weapon, and when it arrived at the Divide, it activated. The Divide was destroyed in seconds. The ground split open. Warheads detonated. The settlement was wiped off the map. Everyone died. Everyone except Ulysses, who watched it all happen. And the marked men, former NCR and Legion soldiers who were caught in the blast and now wander the ruins as walking corpses, kept alive by radiation and sheer refusal to accept that they're already dead. Ulysses survived. And he blamed you, not because you intentionally destroyed the Divide. You didn't. You had no idea what you were carrying. But you were the delivery mechanism. And to Ulysses, that makes you responsible. You killed the Divide. You killed history itself. And he wants you to understand what that means. He wants you to feel the weight of what you destroyed, even if you didn't mean to, even if you didn't know, because intent doesn't matter, results matter. And the result is that the Divide is gone. So yeah, no pressure. Here's where Ulysses' philosophy gets interesting and deeply disturbing. He believes that symbols and nations can die like people. And he's not wrong. The Divide did die. Not just the people, but the idea of it, the promise of what it could have been. That's a death that doesn't involve a body, but it's just as real as any bullet to the head. And Ulysses wants to kill the NCR and the Legion the same way, not by murdering their citizens, but by destroying their symbols. He wants to nuke the Long 15 and Hoover Dam, the roads and landmarks that define both nations. If he succeeds, both factions collapse, not because everyone dies, but because the idea of them dies. The NCR without the Long 15 can't expand. The Legion without the dam can't conquer. They become irrelevant, and irrelevance is its own kind of death. What makes this bizarre is that Ulysses is technically right. Nations don't die like people. They fade, they crumble, they're forgotten. Empires that lasted centuries are now footnotes in history books. Civilizations that seemed eternal are now archaeological sites. And Ulysses wants to speed up that process because he believes the old world's symbols need to die before something new can grow. He's not wrong, he's just extreme. And extremism in the service of a point is still extremism, but it's philosophically interesting extremism, which is the best kind. Ulysses' death, or the death he wants to cause, is bizarre because it's abstract. You can't shoot an idea. You can't stab a symbol. You can't stop a nation from fading by winning a battle. And that makes Ulysses one of the most dangerous people in the Mojave. Not because he's physically strong, but because he understands that the most effective way to kill something isn't violence. It's irrelevant. He wants to make the NCR and Legion irrelevant. And if he succeeds, they'll die without a single soldier falling in combat. That's not just bizarre. That's philosophical warfare. And it's more effective than bullets. Also, his dialogue is like 4 hours long. So researching this one was an endurance test. Nations can die. Ideas can die. But time is the cruelest killer of all. Just ask the next guy on this list. Or don't, because he's your son. And he's dying of old age while you're still young. Shawn, time's cruelty. Shawn, your son. The whole reason you left Vault 111. You spent the entire game looking for him, fighting through the Commonwealth, making impossible choices, all to save your child. And when you finally find him, he's not a child. He's an old man, and he's dying. Cool, great, thanks Bethesda. Shawn, now known as Father, is the leader of the Institute, the organization responsible for kidnapping people, replacing them with synths, conducting horrific experiments, generally making the Commonwealth a worse place. And he's your son. The baby you watched get stolen is now a 60-year-old man who's been running a shadow government for decades. The reunion you imagined, the moment you've been working towards since you woke up, is nothing like what you expected. Shawn doesn't need you to rescue him. He doesn't want your protection. He brought you out of cryo not to reconnect, but to test you, to see if you were worthy of leading the Institute after he's gone. Your reunion isn't about family. It's a job interview. Yeah, that stings. Shawn's death is bizarre because it's inevitable, and he's completely at peace with it. He's dying of cancer, and he's accepted it, planned for it, made arrangements. He spent his entire life in the Institute, safe from the wasteland, surrounded by the most advanced technology in the world, and none of it can save him. The Institute, for all its power, for all its claims of being humanity's best hope, can't cure cancer. So Shawn is dying the same way pre-war humans did, slowly, painfully, inevitably, despite living in what's supposed to be the future. That's an irony so thick you could cut it with a knife. The irony is suffocating. You were frozen for 210 years. You should be dead. By all rights, you should have died in Vault 111. Just another frozen corpse in a failed experiment. But you're not. You're alive. You're healthier than your son, who lived his entire life in comfort and safety. Time didn't kill you. It killed him. And now you have to watch your child die of old age while you're still in your prime, that's not poetic. That's not symbolic. That's just cruel, like cosmically cruel. Shawn's death is bizarre because it's the most normal death on this list. No mutations, no experiments, no violence, just cancer. The wasteland threw everything at you. Super mutants, raiders, death claws, radiation, the Institute itself, and you survived. But Shawn, safe underground, protected from all of that, couldn't survive his own cells. His body killed him, not the wasteland, not an enemy, just biology. And there's something deeply disturbing about that. The idea that you can do everything right, live in the safest place in the Commonwealth, have access to the best technology available, and still die anyway. Shawn's death proves that safety is an illusion. You can't hide from mortality. You can only delay it, and sometimes the delay makes it worse because you're forced to watch it coming. Whatever, at least he got to be evil before he died. Alright, last one. And it's the complete opposite of everything we've talked about, because this guy didn't die. He was supposed to die. They tried really, really hard to kill him, and he just said no thanks and walked it off. Joshua Graham, refusal to die. Joshua Graham, the burned man, former legate of Caesar's Legion, covered in bandages, soaked in pitch, set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon, and he survived, because apparently death is optional if you're angry enough. Nobody knows how. The Legion doesn't know. Caesar doesn't know. Even Graham doesn't fully explain it. The details are vague, almost mythological. He was covered in pitch, set on fire, and thrown off a cliff into the Grand Canyon. That's not an execution. That's overkill. Being set on fire is fatal. Being thrown into a canyon is fatal. Doing both at once is redundant, and yet Graham walked it off. He crawled out of the canyon, dragged himself across the wasteland, made his way to Zion, and kept going, because apparently spite is a more powerful survival tool than medicine. I respect that level of commitment. Here's the bizarre part. Graham should be dead, not maybe dead, definitely dead. Being set on fire is bad. Being thrown off a cliff is worse. Surviving both is impossible, and yet Graham did it anyway, and then he just kept living. He wrapped himself in bandages, picked up a gun, and went back to killing people, because of course he did. Death tried to claim Joshua Graham, and he said no. That's not survival. That's a declaration of war against mortality itself. That's spite made flesh. What makes Graham's non-death bizarre is that it's treated as miraculous. People in Zion think God saved him. Graham himself believes it. He thinks he survived because he has a purpose, a mission to complete before he's allowed to die. And maybe he's right. Or maybe he just got absurdly, impossibly lucky, and his brain retrofitted meaning onto a statistical anomaly, because humans can't accept randomness. Either way, Graham's survival becomes legend. The burned man, the legate who refused to die. The man who walked out of hell because he wasn't done yet. It's the kind of story that makes raiders nervous and makes religious people think twice. But here's the thing that makes Graham's story deeply disturbing. His survival retroactively makes every other death in the Legion look pathetic. If Graham can survive being set on fire and thrown into a canyon, then everyone else who died from lesser injuries just didn't try hard enough. That's absurd, obviously, but it's also kind of true. Graham survived because he refused not to. He didn't accept death. He didn't give up. He just kept going, kept moving, kept existing out of pure stubborn refusal to quit. And that refusal reshaped his entire identity. He's not Joshua Graham anymore. He's the burned man, the legend, the ghost, the man who died and came back wrong, or came back right, depending on your perspective. Graham's death, or lack thereof, is bizarre because it's proof that in Fallout, death is optional if you're stubborn enough. The wasteland doesn't get to decide when you die. You do. And if you refuse hard enough, if you're angry enough, if you're determined enough, you can just walk it off. That's not realistic. That's not scientific. That's mythology. And that's what makes Joshua Graham one of the most bizarre non-deaths in the series. He should be a corpse at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Instead, he's a walking reminder that sometimes the rules don't apply. And sometimes survival is just spite wearing a human face. Honestly, if I survived that, I'd probably become a religious zealot too. So we've covered fridge kids who don't eat, leaders killed by bears, ghost people who can't die, vault dwellers who killed each other for nothing, a psychic kid waiting for death that never comes, a sex bot with a body count, LARPers who died when the game ended, a soldier whose past self was murdered, a courier who killed a nation, a son who died while his parents stayed young, and a man who survived execution through sheer refusal. And honestly, we've barely scratched the surface. Fallout is full of deaths that make no sense, deaths that make too much sense, and deaths that make you question whether the developers were okay when they wrote this. I spent way too long researching these, lost sleep over the ghost people, and had to replay Dead Money, which I didn't appreciate, but that's the job. But here's the thing these bizarre deaths teach us. The wasteland doesn't follow rules. People don't die heroic. They die randomly, stupidly, ironically. Or they don't die at all, and that's somehow worse. They die because they opened the wrong door, trusted the wrong person, or just got unlucky. And sometimes they survive when they shouldn't. And survival becomes its own kind of curse. That's the real horror of Fallout. Not the death claws or the radiation. It's the fact that meaning is dead, but people keep walking. Competence is optional, but survival is mandatory. You can lose everything, including yourself, and still technically be alive. And sometimes living is the worst fate of all. Yeah, cheerful stuff. So the next time you're playing Fallout and you see a fridge, a robot, or a man covered in bandages, just remember, someone died there, or they didn't, and that's somehow worse, because in the wasteland, death is just another Tuesday, and Tuesday never ends. If you enjoyed this video and want to watch Fallout 4's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, click on the video on the screen.